What's going on, everyone? As you guys know, I've done pretty much reviews on every single Apple product out there. Well, every single portable Apple product. I've done MacBooks, iPads, iPhones, iPods, all these things. But one specific device I haven't done yet, which is an iPad, is actually the iPad Mini 4. And this device has been out for a couple years now. It was actually released in 2015, but it was one of those devices I never got my hands on for some reason. But today I finally got it, and I figure, you know what? I'm not even going to wait. I'm going to do a late 2018 review of it, pretty much how I think it's going so far right now. And then in 2019, I'm going to do an updated review of how I think it's going to last throughout that year up until the end of it. So let's just go ahead and see how this iPad is performing so far in the later part of 2018. Like, I already know I'm kind of late to it, but better late than never in my opinion. Now, looking around the device, this is pretty much similar to almost every single iPad that's ever been released, except the newest iPad, the iPad Pros that are bezel-less. I mean, this thing, I think, kind of reminds me of the 10.5-inch iPad more because the bezels around the screen of the iPad Mini 4 aren't really that big. They're pretty small for the device. I mean, they're not really compared to like an iPad Air, an iPad Pro prior to the newer ones that without the bezel-less. But I definitely don't think it's a cheap design. I think it's a pretty well-built device still. One thing I have to say, though, is that the screen is 7.9 inches, and I actually like the screen size a lot. I think it's definitely like a sweet spot. But the resolution, I mean, I don't think it's low. It's 1536 by 2048, so the pixels per inch is about 324. But I just don't think it's that sharp of a panel. I don't know. I think it's just me. I mean, technically it's a Retina panel, but for me, I just don't think it's as like good as even like an iPhone 8 Plus screen or something like that. I just don't think it looks as good as something like that, but that is kind of my opinion. I know technically speaking, the pixels per inch aren't really that high. The iPhone XR has more pixels per inch than this, so that might have something to do with it, but I just don't think this panel looks as good as maybe like some newer panels do, if that makes any sense. Now, also looking around, you have the home button up front. You have Touch ID, so that's a really awesome thing. I prefer Touch ID over Face ID. I say that in every video, but it is the truth, so what am I going to say about it? Looking around, you also have a headphone jack, which is pretty surprising. This device came out in 2015, so this was pretty much prior to all those headphone jack removals. You also have speakers on the bottom, lightning port, camera on the back, and front camera on the front, and that's really all you need to know about this device in terms of the outside of it. Now, surprising is that this is actually the last iPad mini that was ever released. There's not been an iPad mini 5. I honestly don't think they're ever going to make another one. I just think they're going to focus on the iPad Pros. But that's not really a bad thing either. I think it's a pretty decent device, but I don't really think that's a bad thing either. I like the iPad Pros. Now, talking more so about the inside of this device, it's kind of weird because this iPad got released the same time as the iPhone 6s and the iPhone 6s Plus, well, within the same month. What's crazy is that this iPad started off getting iOS 9, which was pretty good, okay? And right now you can get iOS 12.1 on it, and it's going to get all of iOS 12. I'm pretty sure it's going to get all of iOS 13 here, but I just don't think it's going to go much further than iOS 13. And the reason I say that is because this thing actually came with the Apple A8 chip, which actually kind of sucks. Because if you think about it, it was released the same time as the iPhone 6s, and that actually had the Apple A9 chip. And the Apple A9 chip is much better, in my opinion, than the Apple A8 chip. Because if you think about it, as I always say in literally every single video, the iPhone 6 is not as good as the iPhone 6s. It's very noticeable. But going from an iPhone 6 to the 6s, that is a pretty big jump in terms of performance and speed and everything. And the iPhone 6 had the Apple A8 chip, the iPhone 6s had the Apple A9 chip, and the iPad Mini 4 has the Apple A8 chip, which is the same as the iPhone 6. So that kind of does scare me a little bit to recommend to, just for that aspect alone, because it does have some resemblance to the iPhone 6. But what I'll say the iPad Mini 4 has over the iPhone 6 though, is that it has an extra gig of RAM. So the iPhone 6 only had 1 gig of RAM, the iPhone 6s had 2 gigs of RAM. So the iPad Mini 4 is kind of like that middle point where it's like, has some similarity with the iPhone 6, but it also has some similarity with the iPhone 6s. And I mean, that's kind of like hit or miss. I guess they never miss, so like it's kind of in like the middle of that. And me personally, I just don't know. I definitely would have preferred an Apple A9 chip, even if there's not that big of a difference between them, but I just don't think the Apple A8 chip is as good. So what I'm going to boil this down to is performance is okay. It's better than the iPhone 6, but I'll say it's not as good as the iPhone 6s, and that's my personal opinion. I know everyone's going to have their own opinion on it, but what I'll say is that if you're opening apps, closing apps, multitasking, things like that, that just rhymed, your performance is going to vary, but I'll say that it's very average, okay? Don't expect extensive, like crazy performance, but don't expect horrible performance either. Now, this thing is on iOS 12.1, which kind of cleaned out a lot of things that were messed up, and it kind of cleaned out a lot of the things in the back end. And I never owned the iPad Mini 4 on iOS 11, but I did have an iPad Mini 3 on iOS 11, and that thing was not smooth at all. That thing was buggy all over the place. But on iOS 12, it did kind of clean things up a little bit more. So I think iOS 12 has a lot to do with cleaning up the iPad OS overall, even though the iPad OS, iPhone OS are the same exact thing. I'll say that in terms of the pure app usage and multitasking, things like that, it's going to be okay. It's going to be very average. It's even when you're on iOS 12.1. But what I'll tell you is, in terms of gaming and performance, I think it's pretty decent, okay? I think Temple Run is perfectly fine. It runs perfectly fine on every single device. You could play Temple Run on an iPhone, the first iPhone, it'll work perfectly fine, alright? When you do step it up a little bit to Fruit Ninja, which isn't even that intensive of a game, it also runs that fairly okay. Like, I think there's some skip frames here and there, but I think it's definitely playable. Unlike on the other device I just tested, I think the iPad 5th generation, that thing could not play Fruit Ninja to save its life. I'll say that the iPad mini 4 can definitely hold its own in terms of those two games, but one thing that it actually surprised me with was actually Real Racing 3, and it played that perfectly, not perfectly fine, there were skip frames here and there, but it ran almost like 85% through, and it ran perfectly fine, and it was completely playable. Now, one thing I did say earlier, and I'll mention it again, that the screen doesn't seem like it's the highest like pixel density, so it doesn't really look like the greatest game ever when you're playing it, and I don't really find myself complaining too much about the screen unless it's like an iPhone XR. But what I'll tell you is like, for a game like this, it ran very okay, and like I didn't expect like the greatest performance out of it, but it didn't run completely slow. It was like very decent, I'll say. So in terms of gaming, I'll give it like a 7 out of 10. I think it could still have been better. I feel like if they put the Apple A9 chip, I'm just going to beat it to death, but if they put the Apple A9 chip, I feel like it could have been that much better. But you know what? I'll take the 2 gigs of RAM and I'll just be on my way. So at least they put that, and at least they threw that in there too. So in terms of gaming, I think it's definitely better than what you might think. And I think that's the best way I can explain it. Now, switching over to the camera, this is kind of interesting. They pretty much just took the iPhone 6 camera and put it on this. So, I mean, like, this is pretty much like an iPhone 6 tablet with an extra gig of RAM. That's like the best way I can explain it. It has an 8 megapixel camera on the back. You're able to shoot 1080p videos at up to 30 frames per second. Funny enough, though, you can shoot 720p videos at up to 120 frames per second. So that's, you know, if you ever need it, for some reason you have that option, you are able to shoot in slow motion videos. And I'll say that I think the camera's average. I don't think it's like a spectacular camera at all, but I don't think you're going to be using your camera that much on your iPad. But what I'll tell you is that the camera UI on iPads, I just noticed this. I don't know if it's for the iPad Pro either, but it's like clear on the bottom. Like I never noticed that. Like it's just like an all clear thing. And I just noticed that like on iPhones, it's still like black bars around the place that you're taking photos in. So it's kind of annoying. I really wish it did go kind of clear like what the iPads are doing. I kind of like that a lot. It's super sick. But with the overall camera, I think it's okay for an iPad. Like again, you shouldn't really be taking photos on an iPad anyway, but it's a free country. Do what you want to. And I'll say like at least this tablet has a decent camera. So, you know, at least it has that. You know, I guess it's a pro. The front camera is 1.2 megapixels as well. So, I mean, you can do FaceTime with it. You can do a lot of other things. It's like one of those other things where it's like, you know what, you have that option so you can use it. You can shoot 720p videos on it. So it's HD, I guess, but I really wouldn't even recommend you guys using either of these cameras, but you have that option. So at least there's that. Now this next thing is kind of interesting because you kind of have to factor in the life and how long this device has lasted and in what condition it's in. So battery life is one of those things, like I said, it's kind of depending on your device. On stock, if you bought this thing brand new, it has a 5,124 milliamp hour battery, and that's definitely not a small battery. Like I've seen batteries much smaller than this even on tablets, but I think for the specs that it has, I just don't really think it optimized the best for its chipset. Even though this thing only has an Apple A8 chip, which wasn't even the best in terms of battery management. I mean, we've seen like iPhone 6, they don't really do so well in terms of battery life. The iPhone 6 Plus, however, did pretty decent, which was kind of interesting. I think this thing, because it has such a big screen, and it does have the extra gig of RAM, and it's kind of spec heavy a little bit, not really, but you kind of get the gist. I think that kind of led to it not having the greatest battery life. I'll definitely tell you it's not horrible. You can easily get a couple of days out of it on minor usage. I'm talking like gaming here and there, listening to music, this and that. If you plan on using this thing as like a total laptop replacement, I mean, you will probably have to bring a charger with you, but I'll say that battery life is not a horrible thing about this device, but it's definitely not like a humongously awesome thing about this either. It's definitely like middle of the road. Best way I can explain it probably would be something like a mix between an iPhone 6 Plus and like a MacBook Pro. I mean, because MacBook Pros don't last that long. iPhone 6 Plus did kind of last a little bit. So it's like the battery life of them combined, that's like an iPad mini, but it's not. That was the worst example I've ever done in my life. But that's what I get for trying to come up with something on the spot. But I don't think this iPad has horrible battery life, but I don't think it's great either. Again, it's like very average of the road. It might last longer than a MacBook, but it's not going to last crazy hours. It's not going to last like days and days and days or weeks. Standby time is pretty decent though, I'll give it that. But overall, I just don't think the battery life is like crazy good. Now, some other notable things to note, like I said, it does have a fingerprint sensor. It is getting iOS 12, so that's pretty good. I'm pretty sure it's going to get iOS 13 as well. I don't think it's going to get iOS 14. And I mean, overall, how I'll pretty much sum this up is, I'll just break this in a couple categories, okay? Are you planning on buying this tablet brand new? If you're planning on buying an iPad brand new right now, I would not even get an iPad mini 4. I would honestly probably look at like a 2016 iPad Pro in the used market, because I think these things are still selling for like over $250 in the Apple Store, probably even more than that. I'd probably recommend you getting like a 2016 iPad Pro. You can get like the 11-inch one or whichever the smaller model is. You can get like the 9.7-inch model one, whichever the smaller one is, and use that one. That's the exact one I have, and the performance on that is crazy good. Battery is amazing, and I really have no complaints with it. Versus, I mean, I would not recommend you buying an iPad mini 4 at retail price now. Now that's kind of that, but if you need a device and you found a good price for an iPad mini 4, you just don't know if you should buy it or not, I'll say that it's not a horrible device. It's still getting supported. I think the only really huge problem I have with it is the Apple A8 chip. But I think for a light tablet usage, if you want to keep something around the house, if you want to take notes on something here and there, it's not bad. It's not a bad tablet at all. I mean, I'll say the max I would spend on something like this would probably be like $160. Anything over $160, I probably wouldn't buy it. But if you're someone who really needs a tablet and you don't care if it's brand new or not, just get an iPad Pro. Even a 2000, I don't know if they made a 2015 one, but even those ones are better than this thing. I think even an iPad Air 2 might do you better than an iPad mini 4. I think that also had the A8 chip or maybe even the A9 chip. But I'd definitely rather pick a used iPad Pro 2016 over an iPad mini 4, and that's my opinion. And the reason I'm only relating those two is because they're so similar in prices. But as I said before, I don't think the iPad mini 4 is a bad device either. I think it's good, but I just don't think it's worth the retail value that they're selling it at. I kind of say the same thing about the iPhone XR as well, because it's not a horrible device at all, but I just don't think the price is worth it. I mean, it's way too much money for what it is. If it's a little bit cheaper, yes, it's a pretty decent phone. It's kind of the same thing here. It's kind of too expensive, to whatever, 300, whatever it is. It's really not worth it. I mean, if it's cheaper, I'd recommend it. But I'll leave links in the description if you guys want to pick up an iPad mini 4. It'll be the first link down there. Definitely buy it through that link. Also leave a link to an iPad Pro 2016. Or 2017, whichever model I find. I always try to find the lowest prices on Amazon, linking down below. So make sure you guys get them through that link if you want to help support the channel. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button. That don't mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those things are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. Also, I'm doing an iPhone giveaway. I'm giving away 2 iPhones next month in December, so click the one of the links down in the description. It's like the second, third one, or whatever, the one after the Amazon links, if you want to enter that iPhone giveaway. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out to them.